Dust hung in the golden air, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the ranch. Silas stood near the wooden fence, his broad shoulders slumped under the weight of unspoken burdens. He watched Ilara, a figure in white, as she emerged from the modest cabin, her veil fluttering softly against her skin, concealing the scars of her past. Ilara moved with a quiet grace, her presence like a whisper in the wind. She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the storm clouds gathering in the distance. When the first drops fell, she stepped into the open, laughter bubbling from her lips, echoing through the stillness. The rain splashed around her, a cleansing dance, each drop washing away remnants of sorrow. Silas, rooted in place, felt his heart crack open, drawn to the light she exuded even behind the veil. In that moment the world faded, leaving only the rhythm of rain and the purity of her unguarded joy. The sun hung low over the dusty town, casting long shadows that blended with the scent of sweat and leather. Ilara stood in the marketplace, her heart racing beneath a veil that shrouded not just her face, but her entire existence. Her brother's final words echoed in her mind, a cruel reminder of the betrayal that had been woven into their bond. "You're worth more as a bride than a sister," he had said, and with that, he had exchanged her fate for a handful of coins. The grasp of his hand had faded, leaving only a cold emptiness in its wake, yet the sting of betrayal lingered, wrapping itself around her like an iron cloak. Silas leaned against a weathered post, the weight of his own ancestry heavy on his shoulders. Half native and embittered by a world that had cast him aside, he sought solace in the rugged landscape of the West. But today was different. Today, his gaze fell upon a figure enclosed in fabric, a wraith-like presence among the bustling crowd. The soft rustle of Ilara's veil caught his attention, drawing him closer as if he had been beckoned by an unseen force. There was something hauntingly beautiful about her, a subtle magnificence that transcended the scarring which marked her skin beneath that delicate layer. As Silas approached, he could see the tension in Ilara's posture, a stillness that belied the turmoil inside her. She did not meet his gaze, her eyes downcast, smeared with the dust of a life too harsh for someone of her grace. He wondered what thoughts held her captive, what shadows danced behind those unhidden eyes. Whatever they were, he sensed they were not meant for him to understand. The air felt thick between them, charged with an electric current of unspoken stories and unyielding grief. Ilara could feel Silas's presence before she even turned. The way he stood, grounded yet restless, made her heart race. He was tall and broad, a man molded by the land, a silhouette of rugged strength. Yet as she glimpsed him through the veiling fabric, she picked up on a distance in his expression, an emotional wall built from the ashes of his own past. Rather than intrigue, it was caution she saw in his eyes, a mirror reflecting her own fears. She thought she saw fragments of understanding there, but the distance between them was a canyon wide and treacherous. In the silence that enveloped them, there was a moment where their worlds collided, a fleeting glimmer of connection that was quickly extinguished by their respective realities. Ilara was still a commodity, a thing to be owned, while Silas was a man searching for belonging in a place that denied him the right to define himself. Their lives had been scorched by the same sun, yet they were bound to different paths that seemed infinitely distant. The transaction of her sale felt like a cruel cosmic joke, one that rendered both of them mere players in a tragic theater of fate. With the transaction complete, Ilara felt the weight of expectation settle onto her shoulders like a suffocating blanket. The price was paid, and she was to be a wife, a role that felt foreign and alarming. Silas turned to leave, the moment hanging heavy in the air, yet Ilara sensed that his departure wouldn't bring her solace. Instead, it deepened the chasm she felt within, the raw wound of being nothing more than an object cast aside by the very person she should have been able to trust. Days turned into nights, and the town became a new prison, suffused with faces that looked right through her. Each morning she awoke to the echoes of her brother's betrayal, and each night she lay beneath the stars, yearning for the moon's embrace to wash away the memories. Silas remained a phantom in her thoughts, an enigma she couldn't shake off. There was no escaping the emotional distance, even as she replayed their brief encounter. What could have been? What should never have been? Hope felt like a distant star, flickering just out of reach. The rain fell one afternoon, a sudden deluge that transformed the earth into a glistening canvas. Ilara stepped outside, guided by an instinct she had long suppressed. She peeled back the veil, allowing the droplets to cascade down her face, cleansing the scars hidden beneath. In that moment, she began to dance, each step a defiance against the chains that bound her. The rhythm was a raw release, the downpour absorbing her fears as she twirled in abandon, unaware of the eyes watching from a distance. Silas stood there, transfixed by the sight of her unrestrained movement. The emotional distance that had once felt insurmountable began to waver as he watched her reclaim her spirit, every drop of rain glistening like diamonds against her skin. In that moment of captivating vulnerability, the weight of his own struggles surged within him. He felt a stirring long, buried, a yearning to bridge the distance he had so carefully maintained. But the fear of stepping closer held him back, leaving only the haunting melody of her dance echoing in the hollow space between them. Ilara stepped down from the wagon, her heart racing with each tentative footfall on the dusty ground of the ranch. The sprawling landscape stretched before her, raw and unrefined, with jagged mountains in the distance that looked far more welcoming than the tightly wound knots of anxiety within her. She took a deep breath, the dry air settling heavily in her lungs, and turned her gaze towards the weathered wooden house that loomed ahead. Its once bright paint was peeling, layered with stories untold, much like her own unspoken history. Silas stood framed in the doorway, a silhouette against the dull light of the interior, hands resting on his worn leather belt. The sun illuminated the sharp contours of his face, casting shadows that hinted at the battles he had fought, both within and without. He watched her with a calm intensity that felt like both a welcome and a challenge, making Ilara acutely aware of the scars that marred her skin, the veils she had wrapped around her heart. With a slight nod, he beckoned her forward, a silent invitation into the world she never thought she would inhabit. As she crossed the threshold, the scent of sagebrush and leather enveloped her. Inside, the air was thick with silence, punctuated only by the creaking floorboards beneath her feet. Ilara's fingers brushed the frayed edge of the faded sofa, a strange comfort in its familiarity. Silas moved past her, the weight of his presence tangible, as if he were guarding an unspoken truth that lingered between them. She could feel his gaze lingering on her, appraising yet cautious, as if he were determining whether she could handle the weight of his world. The evening settled into a quiet rhythm that felt both foreign and oddly soothing. Silas would return from the fields, the sun setting behind him, casting warm hues over the ranch. He would eat in silence, his focus flickering between the plate and the fading light outside. Ilara joined him, their words few but heavy with meaning. They exchanged glances over the table, each shared meal a step into an uncharted territory where vulnerability was a luxury neither could afford. Days melted into weeks, and with each passing moment, Ilara learned the nuances of ranch life, the way the horses moved, the delicate balance required to care for them, and the unyielding resilience of the land. She found solace in the rhythm of chores, though the ghosts of her past clung to her like the dust hung in the air. Silas remained a constant, his presence both anchoring and isolating. He was a man of few words, his life carved from hardship, a silent warrior that bore the weight of his scars as if they were badges of honor. In the quietude of her new life, Ilara felt the edges of her heart begin to thaw, though she was careful to shield her deeper wounds. She had lost too much to trust easily, and the echoes of laughter and love felt like a distant dream. Each time Silas looked at her, she wondered what he saw. Was it the woman she once was, or the spectre of the girl she hoped to become? Their evenings would stretch long into the darkness, the stars above bearing witness to the unspoken bond slowly forming between them. One night, a storm threatened to break the stillness of the ranch, dark clouds rolling in with a menacing promise. Silas worked late, securing the barn doors against the brewing tempest while Ilara watched from the porch, the wind tousling her hair as droplets began to fall. She felt a pull deep within, an instinct that called her outside, toward the storm that rumbled with both chaos and beauty. She stepped into the rain, feeling the cool droplets race down her skin as the world around her came alive. Ilara twirled, arms stretching wide to embrace the rain as it fell in sheets, each droplet washing away the weight of her doubts. Laughter erupted from her lips, a sound that felt foreign yet liberating. She danced with abandon, her steps fluid and light as the world blurred around her. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to forget the veil that covered her scars, losing herself in the freedom of the storm. Silas paused at the barn entrance, his breath catching as he watched her. The rain soaked her hair, clinging to her skin as she moved in a way that was both wild and beautiful. He felt something shift within him, a crack in the wall he had built to protect his heart. In that moment, he saw not the scars she tried to hide, but the radiant spirit she allowed to shine through, flooding his own heart with a warmth he had long believed buried. As the storm raged on, Ilara danced, a light in the tempest, and Silas felt the unfamiliar pull of hope begin to unfurl inside him. Ilara woke each morning with the first light kissing the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. She would slip out of the small cabin, careful not to disturb Silas, who often lay wrapped in dreams half-remembered, the weight of the world still resting on his brow. She cherished these moments alone, where the air was fresh with the scent of dew-kissed grass and the soft rustle of leaves whispered promises of solitude. Taking a deep breath, she let her hands trace the contours of the land, grounding herself in the rhythm it offered. Each sunbeam seemed to awaken something within her, a flicker of joy that danced just beyond reach. Silas, however, would wake to the quiet stillness of an empty room, his heart thrumming with a mixture of unease and curiosity. It puzzled him why Ilara chose to rise before the sun. In those early hours, he often felt the weight of his own thoughts, tangled and heavy. He couldn't shake the feeling that beneath her calm exterior lay a tempest of emotions, a storm waiting to break free. He would sit on the porch, sipping bitter coffee while watching the world awaken, drawing solace from the mountain peaks that stood sentinel around them. As the sun climbed higher, their routines began to intertwine. Silas would saddle his horse for another long day of work, while Ilara tended to the small garden she'd started to cultivate, her fingers running through the earth as if connecting with something deeper. They exchanged glances, brief and laden with unspoken words, like two dancers on the cusp of a waltz, yet unsure of the tempo. Ilara could feel Silas's eyes on her as she moved, the way she coaxed the flowers to bloom. Each glance was an invitation to bridges yet unbuilt, and yet a barrier hung between them, thick and unyielding. In the evenings they would sit side by the fire, its warmth chasing away the chill of twilight. But the air between them was laced with tension. Silas would speak of trails crossed and the livestock they needed to tend, his voice steady but cautious. Ilara offered little beyond polite responses, a veil drawn down around her thoughts. The scars hidden beneath her veil echoed louder in the silence, a reminder of battles fought and lost. Each time Silas's gaze lingered on the fabric that shrouded her, an unvoiced question hung in the air, a plea for understanding that she was not ready to meet. Days slipped into weeks, the seasons shifting in subtle strokes. It was during one of those afternoons when the sky turned leaden with impending rain that Ilara found herself irresistibly drawn outside. She had spent too long buried in her thoughts. It was time to let the storm cleanse her spirit. Silas watched from the porch as she stepped into the downpour, the rain cascading against her skin like a baptism. He felt an instinctual pull, a need to follow this wild spirit that was both enticing and terrifying. The sight of Ilara dancing in the rain was mesmerizing. Water dripped from her hair, tracing lines down her back, and for the first time, Silas saw the raw truth of her existence laid bare. She twirled and spun, laughter mingling with the thunder, each movement shedding the weight of her scars. It was as though the rain washed away layers of doubt and fear, and for those vivid moments she became a force of nature, unstoppable and free. Yet amidst that beauty, Silas felt a pang of longing and regret as the weight of his own inadequacies pressed heavily on his chest. Driven by an impulse he struggled to understand, Silas stepped off the porch and into the storm, the rain drenching him instantly. He hesitated at the edge of her dance, awash with admiration, but a part of him felt like an intruder in this moment of liberation. Ilara turned to him, her laughter faltering as lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the hesitation in his eyes. For a heartbeat, they stood together, suspended in time, a half-native cowboy drawn to a bride shrouded in mystery, yet yearning for connection. "Join me," she beckoned, her voice rising above the roar of the rain, a challenge and invitation woven in those two simple words. Silas felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crumble, his fears dissolving in the same way the rain splashed against the earth. But would he dare defy the confines of his own uncertainty, step closer to the fire of her spirit, and allow his heart to dance alongside hers in the storm? Ilara's challenge hung in the air, electrifying and heavy with possibility. In that moment, amidst the downpour, Silas grappled with the strands of his past, the narratives that had cloaked him in shadows. He glanced up, his gaze locking with hers across the expanse of rain, and saw not just the woman he had bought as a bride, but a mirror reflecting his own desires, fears, and dreams. The storm raged on, and amidst the chaos, a new understanding flickered to life. The rain fell in sheets, transforming the dry earth into a muddy canvas. Ilara stood on the porch, gazing into the downpour, her heart racing like hooves pounding the ground. Silas was out there somewhere, staring into the storm, perhaps wondering why the girl he had married was so distant. The veil she wore, both during the ceremony and now in her solitude, felt heavier than ever, shrouding her in a fog of uncertainty. The echoes of laughter that had filled their home earlier that day now felt like ghosts, hauntingly distant. Silas had tried to connect, poring over maps and tales of the West, but Ilara remained ensnared in her thoughts, hesitant to break through the surface of her carefully constructed facade. The scars that marred her skin were only part of the story. There were deeper wounds in her heart, scars that made the dance of intimacy perilous. Silas stepped inside, shaking the rain from his hat, unwittingly breaking the spell of her reverie. He looked worn and wild, the light of the storm reflecting off the depths in his gaze. "You're quiet, Ilara," he said, voice low and tentative, as if he were approaching a wild animal. "You've hardly said a word since we came back." The truth was, words had danced on the tip of her tongue, yearning to be unleashed, but each time she opened her mouth, panic tiptoed across her chest, reminding her of the barriers she had erected. "I'm just thinking," she replied, the lie tasting bitter on her lips. The vulnerability that hung between them crackled like electricity, charged and charged, but neither dared take a step closer. "Thinking about what?" Silas probed, a hint of frustration lacing his voice. "Maybe we could share the silence instead. It feels colder than I expected." Her heart ached for him, for the longing in his eyes, but she felt trapped within the fortress of her shame. What could she say? That she feared him seeing her for who she truly was, beyond the veil, beyond the expectations they both carried. Suddenly the clouds bulged, releasing a torrent that pounded against the wooden beams. Silas stepped closer, water rivulets glistening on his skin, and Ilara felt an unbearable heaviness. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly, the weight of his words pressing against her heart. I can't promise to understand everything, but I want to try. You've taken a chance on me. The word chance echoed in her mind, intertwining with memories of past betrayals. Why did she feel like a gamble? Why did her life feel like a paradox of joy and despair? Silas's sincerity illuminated the darkness, a flicker of hope that ignited a spark of courage within her. But the dance of vulnerability was not so simple. Fear was a skilled dancer too. She turned her gaze to the rain-soaked ground, inhaling deeply, feeling the churning emotions swell like a storm inside her chest. "It's not you," she finally whispered, letting the unburdening begin. "It's me. I don't know how to be seen. Not without the veil." Her voice trembled, the admission unraveling some of the knots binding her heart. "I'm afraid you'll see the scars and think I'm not worth it." Silas's breath caught in his throat, his expression transforming from confusion to understanding. He reached for her hesitantly, as if afraid to shatter her fragile state. "Ilara, no one sees you the way I do. The scars, they tell a story, but they don't define you." His hands, warm and steady, enveloped hers, grounding her in the tempest of their emotions. "I want to hear your story, no matter how it's wrapped." In that moment, a crack formed in her reserves, a fissure that allowed a flood of emotion to pour through. The tears she had fought to contain broke free, streaming down her face, mingling with the rain. She let the veil slip from her grasp, allowing its weight to cascade down and pool at her feet. Silas stepped back, his eyes wide with realization, yet he didn't look away. Instead, he simply stood, rooted in the truth she had laid bare. With the rain drenching them both, Ilara felt a surge of freedom, raw and exhilarating. In letting go, she found a rhythm, a melody of acceptance woven within the storm's embrace. As the droplets danced around them, she could see Silas clearly. His strength, his silent promise to stand by her side, and the kindness that sparkled within his soul. The rain washed away her fears, if only for a moment, revealing a woman willing to step into the light, unashamed, vulnerable, and alive. The rain fell in sheets, creating a symphony of soft splashes against the dusty earth, cascading off the porch roof onto the wooden planks below. Silas watched from the window, his breath misting the glass as he traced the outline of Ilara's silhouette. Barely visible through the sheets of water, she stood unperturbed under the downpour, her veil flapping like a flag against the storm, an ethereal being in a world painted by rain. He could hardly believe she had agreed to stay, let alone to dance. Ilara moved with a grace that felt almost supernatural, her bare feet sinking into the mud, the droplets glistening on her skin. As she twirled, the veil caught the wind, billowing around her like a cloud. Silas felt an inexplicable pull deep within him, something tethered to the sight of her joyful abandon. She let go of her own burdens, even if only for a brief moment, and in that abandon she ignited a spark deep within him. The shackles of the past that had once bound him felt a little looser as he watched her dance. His heart raced, an insistent rhythm that matched the thrum of rain against the ground. With every twirl, she seemed to shed the weight of her scars, her pain momentarily forgotten. In that dance, he saw a reflection of himself, the half-native boy who had long ago stopped believing in beauty, in joy, in the simple act of being seen. Ilara was not merely a bride bought under the constraints of fate. She was a promise of something he never thought he'd find again. Silas stepped onto the porch, his boots making the familiar creak that signaled his presence. The rain hit him like a cool embrace, refreshing and exhilarating. Ilara glanced up, her laughter rising above the sound of the downpour, and for a heartbeat, the world around them fell silent. Silas met her gaze, the corners of his mouth betraying a smile. She beckoned him to join her, a gesture so inviting it pulled him forward through the storm. As he stepped away from the safety of the porch, the rain soaked him through, an unexpected baptism that washed away the remnants of his reservations. He approached her, a hesitant smile breaking through the tension that had settled upon them since their awkward first days together. Ilara reached for his hand, her skin cool and inviting against his. Together they danced, the music of the rain creating a melody that moved through their intertwined souls. With every beat of the storm, their bodies found each other, swirling around in a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. Ilara's laughter resonated against the backdrop of the raindrops, her joy palpable as she urged him to let go. Silas accepted the invitation, allowing himself to be swept into the moment, the weight of the world around them diminishing like the water dripping from the eaves above. It was in her eyes that he saw a flicker of understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the scars they both carried, both seen and unseen. He felt her pain, a palpable energy that lingered between them as they moved together. In that connection, the veil that separated them began to lift, revealing the raw beauty of two souls searching for belonging. The storm became their sanctuary, a backdrop for the flickering hope that danced in the spaces between them. As they spun around in the rain, Silas felt the heat of her laughter echo against his chest like a beating drum, urging him to breathe and trust. They became intertwined in a vibrant tapestry woven from joy and sorrow, a story they were just beginning to write. Each drop of rain became a promise, each laugh a note of understanding that perhaps they could find solace together. The moment stretched and shimmered around them, and in the depths of the rain-soaked twilight, they were no longer merely two strangers, but companions on the journey of healing. Ilara's fingers slid through Silas's as they slowed, their shared laughter fading into a comfortable silence. They stood together, faces tilted toward the sky, watching the raindrops dance against the horizon. In that fleeting connection, Silas sensed a road not yet traveled, but one filled with possibilities. The veil between them had shifted, revealing not only the beauty of vulnerability, but the promise of what lay ahead. Ilara stood in the dim light of their cramped cabin, her fingers tracing the outline of the mirror's edge. The glass reflected not just her image, but the ghosts of her past. Scars carved into the canvas of her skin whispered stories of pain, resilience, and perhaps even redemption. Silas had seen her in this state before, quiet and contemplative, but tonight felt different. A summer storm brewed outside, lightning flickering in the distance like a heartbeat quickening, and she could sense the electricity in the air, mingling with a yearning she had long been afraid to acknowledge. Silas leaned against the weathered doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with a mix of concern and admiration. She sensed his gaze on her, heavy with unspoken questions. The weight of it smothered her, but what frightened her more was the flutter of vulnerability igniting within her. She had wrapped herself in silence, convincing herself it was a protective barrier, yet now that silence felt like chains binding her to a past she no longer recognized. The storm outside rumbled, its ferocity mirroring the tempest brewing in her heart. A flash of lightning illuminated her reflection, and for a fleeting moment she didn't see the scars. She saw the woman she could become. In that instant, the desire to speak swelled inside her like the clouds filling the sky, a tempest of unspoken words and hidden truths. Could she allow herself the freedom of expression? The thought was intoxicating yet terrifying. She battled the instinct to protect herself, to retreat into the comfort of silence that had become her refuge. "Do you ever think about the storm?" Silas broke the stillness, his voice soft and inviting. "How it can seem so chaotic, yet afterward, the world is clearer, brighter." His words hung in the air, a lifeline tossed in her direction. Ilara's heart raced. The image of the storm was so palpable, so relevant to her own struggle. It was time to choose, to weather the chaos or remain ensnarled in the stillness. Ilara turned to meet his eyes, those deep pools of understanding that had drawn her in from the very first moment. "What if the storm breaks everything? What if I'm left with only ruins?" she whispered, the words escaping as a confession. As soon as she spoke, a rush of relief washed over her, mingling with the fear that threatened to claw its way back into her mind. She was terrified of the vulnerability that came with sharing her thoughts, but there was also a strange exhilaration in letting him in. Silas stepped closer, his presence grounding her. "Sometimes it's the ruins that make way for something beautiful," he said, his voice steady. "You know, there's strength in the scars, Ilara. They tell a story that only you can share." The sincerity in his tone was a balm to her wounded spirit, a gentle nudge toward the openness she had shunned for so long. The storm outside intensified, its winds howling like a chorus, urging her toward a revelation. What if she shared her truth? Would he still look at her with those eyes filled with respect and tenderness? The wild-card fear of rejection pulsed in the back of her mind, yet the possibility of liberation tempted her more fiercely. The rain began pelting the cabin roof, a rhythmic symphony that matched the rapid beating of her heart. She had spent so long dancing in the shadows, hiding behind the veil of her scars. But what if she danced in the rain instead? With a deep, shaky breath, Ilara faced the mirror again, this time capturing the determination etched in her heart. She took a step closer to Silas, the space between them a bridge instead of a chasm. "Maybe it's time I let the storm take me," she murmured. "Maybe it's time I shared my story." The words trembled on her lips, raw and vulnerable, yet they filled the air with a courage she didn't know she possessed until now. Silas's eyes brightened, a flicker of hope igniting within them. "You don't have to do it all at once," he reassured her, his expression unwavering. "But when you're ready, I'll be here." In that moment, Ilara realized their bond was deeper than any scar, forged in trust and understanding. The rain began to fall harder, each drop a release of pent-up emotions. She could feel the weight of her silence lifting, replaced by the liberating promise of the storm. She was ready to dance, both in the rain and with the truths that lay hidden in her heart. The rain poured down with relentless intensity, soaking the earth in a rhythmic frenzy, each drop a reminder of the turmoil swirling in Ilara's heart. She stepped outside, her bare feet cold against the slick mud, her veil clinging to her skin like a second layer, yet it began to slip from her head, revealing the scars that marked her journey. Silas stood just inside the doorway, torn between the urge to reach for her and the fear of scaring her away. He watched her move, the way she tilted her face toward the heavens, as if seeking solace in the storm, or perhaps a sense of belonging that had eluded her for so long. Ilara swayed, letting the rain wash away the weight of unshed tears. There was a freedom in this chaos, a wildness that made her feel alive. Her heartbeat quickened as she twirled, limbs lightened by the downpour, the veil slipping off her shoulders to pool at her feet. Each drop was a release, a reminder that she was more than the scars that marred her skin, each one telling a story of survival, of resilience. Silas felt drawn to her, as if the very storm called him closer to her, to the truth, to the beauty that she so desperately fought against. He stepped into the rain, water cascading off his hat, drenching his clothes. Every step felt like a leap of faith, each stride fueled by the hope that they could bridge the chasm that lay between them. "Ilara," he called, his voice barely audible above the tempest. She turned to him, a flicker of surprise momentarily breaking her focus. Her eyes sparkled like the wet earth, revealing a soul that longed to be known, a spirit that craved connection even amidst her fears. As if sensing his approach, Ilara paused, her breath catching in her throat. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken thoughts and emotions that had been bottled up for far too long. Silas halted a few feet away, the water streaming down his face like tears he'd never shed, eyes locked onto hers, desperate to convey the depth of his feelings. In that instant, the world around them faded, leaving only the raw power of their connection pulsing in the air, electrifying and daunting. "Why do you hide?" he asked, not as a question but as a plea. willing her to see the truth that radiated from him. "You don't have to wear that veil with me." His heart raced, each word an earnest attempt to breach the barriers she had built against love, against acceptance. "I see you, Ilara. I see everything. The scars, the strength, the beauty. You're not alone." Ilara's legs trembled as she stood still, grappling with the overwhelming emotions surging within her. The rain blurred the borders between them, washing away the shield she had clung to so fiercely. "Silas," she whispered, the sound barely escaping her, a breath caught in the storm of her fears. It was just a whisper, a tentative first step toward the enormity of what he offered her. Unconditional love, acceptance without conditions. And it was in that moment, the air thick and charged, that something shifted. A crack in her armor appeared, allowing a flood of emotions to pour forth. "Silas," she called again, this time louder, more resolute. "You don't understand, I'm afraid." The truth spilled from her like the rain, a torrent of vulnerability. "I'm afraid that you'll see my scars and turn away, that you'll think I'm not worth loving." "No," he said fiercely, stepping closer, the space between them diminishing. "Ilara, you are worth everything. You are more than your scars. You've fought battles I can't even begin to understand, and you stand here, dancing in the rain. You are a warrior. Let me be part of your journey. Let me see you as you are." The veil lay discarded on the ground, a symbol of the walls she had put up. Ilara inhaled deeply, feeling alive in a way she had never let herself experience before. "Silas," she breathed one final time, the name resonating with newfound strength. In that instant, she fully recognized him as more than a cowboy who had brought her with a veil over her scars. He was her partner, her champion, her heart's home. The tempest around them matched the tempest in her soul. But for the first time, she felt ready to embrace it all, ready to dance not just in the rain, but in the light of love, unshackled and free. The rain fell softly, each drop a whispered secret, weaving through the twilight like threads of silver. Ilara stood in the embrace of the storm, her veil fluttering, a fragile wall of past pain nearly dissolving in the liquid embrace. Silas watched, breath caught in the rhythm of her dance, each movement a gentle rebellion against the scars beneath. The world blurred around them, the cacophony of thunder muted by the quiet understanding settling between their hearts. He stepped closer, the ground squishing beneath his boots, earth and sky merging in an exquisite tapestry of life. With reverence, he reached out, brushing the veil aside, revealing the beauty of her journey etched in the delicate lines of her skin. Ilara paused, her body still, the dance suspended, as if the universe held its breath for a heartbeat. A fleeting moment of vulnerability. A soft smile broke through the raindrops, her scars transformed into symbols of strength, glistening like the stars beginning to pierce through the clouds. Silas mirrored her smile, a silent promise woven in the air between them. As the rain began to subside, they stood together, united in the quiet, their hearts beating in unison, no words needed.